Hey everyone, my name is Aaron Ray, and for my first presentation, I would like to talk about Warner Brothers, as they are an animation studio that I think we all have heard of if we've come across, some of their cartoons or some of their movies. I think we all recognize the Warner Brothers brand. So I want to dive into really their early history and some of the steps they took to become really successful. But I also want to focus specifically on how they work to commoditize some of their characters and create a brand that really was larger than just the films that they created themselves. And so before I get into the actual bulk of the presentation itself, I do just want to go over a structure at a high level so I provide some direction with where I'm going. And so first, I'm going to talk about just the history of the Warner Brothers Studios at a very high level. Then I will talk about some of their major animation hits, so some of the characters that they created that really helped them reach some success. Then, I sort of hinted at this just now by saying this, but then the next part I will talk about the specifics of the Looney Tunes franchise, which was a product of the Warner Bros. Studio, which I think we all, have heard of, and it was a really successful franchise for them. And then I will also talk about, lastly, how they were able to market and commoditize the Looney Tunes brand and some of the other characters that they created during their history. So to start things off from the beginning, the origins of the Warner Bros. Studio starts with Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising when they effectively inaugurated the studio, and then they quickly began to fill out a staff who had ties to Disney. A lot of the staff that worked for Ising and Harman early on actually came from working directly from the Disney animation studio. So in the product of the animations that were created from the early Warner Bros. Productions, they actually reflected a lot of the same techniques and styles of the Disney animation products, which received a lot of critiques and pushbacks from the general public, as they could recognize that there was definitely some similarities between the two. But as Harman and Ising began to work together, their first major studio release was called Sinking in the Bathtub, and they released that in May of 1930, which later became known as the first Looney Tune, as was described in the Malton text. And this film was centered around one character, and his name was Bosco the Talking Kid, which was a real big character for the firm as they started to get involved in the animation industry. But the Harman and Ising team actually split in 1933, and they took all of the characters that they created in their time at the Warner Brothers Studios with them, and this left one individual in particular in charge named Leon Schlesinger, and he was actually someone that helped invest and finance Harman and Ising as they worked to create the Warner Bros. Studio from scratch. So he had a lot of confidence in the firm, but he was really left to pick up the pieces and form his own studio. And so some people might expect that once the leaders of a company or an animation studio leave, there might be significant changes in the end product. This really didn't happen when Schlesinger took over, as he was really insulated with a great number of animators who were still working at the Warner Brothers Studios, and these animators were actually known as the Termite Terrorists, and this was because of two reasons. One, because the studio itself really didn't have a lot of money and a lot of resources, and two, there were a lot of famous animators who worked in the studio that later became recognized for their efforts. And an example of one of the animators that worked here was Mel Blanc, and he, for instance, was the voice behind Porky, and there was also Tex Avery and Bob Clampett that was in this Termite Terrorist group. So a big animation success, big character success for them was Porky, and he made his debut in the Merry Melodies cartoon. And then later on, Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny became really big characters for Warner Brothers as they created a big consumer base in the marketplace. And Tex Avery created Porky Pig, but he unfortunately left Warner Brothers for MGM in 1942. And to just summarize animation at a whole under Warner Brothers, I know that was a lot, but it never really received the respect or the resources that it deserved, because it had a lot of high quality animators that worked for them, and it produced a lot of high quality animations. And so they really struggled to compete with Disney, and that was fair because Mickey Mouse was just a character that was a real triumph, and it was hard for other characters like Porky Pig outright to pass the popularity of Mickey Mouse. But Bugs Bunny was a really famous character for Warner Brothers and the Looney Tunes franchise, like I said, as a whole. And as the animation industry sort of dried up in the 1960s, the Warner Brothers studio was really faced with transitioning and finding ways to bring in revenues while they still had, their foot in an industry that was kind of drying up. And so they were really able to build a brand out of the Looney Tunes franchise, and you saw that through the partnership with Michael Jordan and Looney Tunes in the Space Jam franchise. And I really liked the Warner Brothers studio because they were able to survive through the past couple of decades as the animation industry has fundamentally changed so much because they were able to create really solid characters in Looney Tunes that created a really solid customer base and a really solid collection of cartoons that are still loved and enjoyed today. So thank you so much for listening to my first presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I did include some sources in here to help build this presentation, and I have included that in the description of this video. So thank you so much.